Next, I am delighted to share my screen with my colleague, Richard Allardice, or as we affectionately call him here at Optimal Workshop, just Dice. Dice has worked as an information architect, a content strategist, and a writer at Springload, Xero, and as an independent consultant. Right now, he's chuffed to be working at Optimal Workshop as our resident information architect, and we are equally excited to have him on board. He's going to talk to us today about the information architecture of tasks. Over to you, Dice.
Dice, if you could just unmute for me, please.
How about now? All good? You can hear me?
Perfect. Thank you, Dice.
Okay, and can you see the black screen with the title on it?
We can.
Cool. All right, that little bit of nervousness over. Thank you for the intro. Hi, I'm Dice. I'm an information architect at Optimal Workshop. Today I'm going to talk about the information architecture of tasks. I'm not going to talk about ontology, although that's a worthy and important thing to learn about, and not just because Kat's already done a really great job of that. And I'm not going to talk about websites and applications, menus, sitemaps, the process of, and not just because Ruth's already done an excellent job of that. Thank you so much for getting those two important pieces of work presented today. I'm going to talk a little bit about applying information architecture to something a little bit different, and that's around tasks. And what I mean by tasks are the work we try and do, try is an important word, as a team, an individual, and an organization, including to-dos, jobs, goals, etc. And why am I going to talk about that? Well, first challenge is that we're collectively terrible at this. We're terrible at tasks. Around 40% of all things on a to-do list never get done. And I think that sounds charitable. Anecdotally, it seems a lot worse than that to me. And one of the problems is that we hope that other people will solve this for us. We go to a piece of software and we hope that that software's model or framework or method or architecture will help organize us. Whereas in actual fact, that hope that will happen is often not enough. Now, why is it useful for us to think about this with an information architecture view? Well, at its essence, doing a task or doing something seems like it should be simple. You know, I'm out there, you know, I'm on my kite surfing board. I'm you know, kite surfing into the sunset. I've just got my one thing I need to do. It's simple. But the reality of the modern workplace is that it's not simple because everyone's out there trying to do their thing. They're crisscrossing. We've got shared goals. We're all trying to share the wind, the space, and it's complicated. And information architecture actually excels at solving complexity. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Also, there's inherently a little bit of a difficulty, and Kat touched on this earlier, around information architecture, the discipline itself. To some, it can feel a little bit abstract, difficult to define, maybe a little bit open to practice. Where do I start? There's a question that I often get. So what I want to do is to make information architecture practical so that anyone who doesn't have information architecture in their job title, which is pretty much everyone on this call and probably in most of the people in the world, can practice information architecture within their jobs and their projects and the things they're trying to achieve. So we're going to talk about tasks. We're going to talk about me trying to work out what needs to happen. And we're going to talk about it using this process for considering information architecture. And so this process is dividing information architecture up to into these considerations that may or may not be sequential. You may not need to do all these things, but they are useful considerations of information architecture to help you work through a problem or a part of a problem. And I'm going to go through them step by step, starting with understanding an environment, whether you're the owner of that environment or you're a visitor to it. Now, some of you may have encountered this kind of feeling coming to a project or an environment. It feels like this office. It's a complete mess. You don't know where things are. You don't know what's important. And if you're to solve this problem, then the first thing you need to do is understand the problem more and understand what's going on. You can't just pull out some bins and start throwing stuff away because you don't know what's important and what's not. So you need to know what you're working with, understand the landscape a little bit, understand the needs and the motivations of the people who work in this office, but also who need to use it, for example. So this is me laying down in a bit of a concept map, what I think tasks or a task system might need to be. Now, this is not me solving the problem. This is me throwing all these things down to work out, well, what is a task? What is a goal? How do those things relate? What's important? To some people, this might still feel like the office. So like my workings on this page are not necessarily going to bring clarity to other people, but it is a way of getting my ideas down in visual form and helping them understand where my thinking might be going, which is an important first step in understanding what you're working with. The other thing that is useful when you model out something like this is that you can distill things down, simplify it down to what are the really important concepts or objects that I need to work with in designing my system. In looking at here, I've distilled it down to this. The important concepts, if I'm to design this task system for me or my team or the people I work with or people who want me to help them save them from their task disaster system, is the idea of a goal, a task, a milestone, a principle, and a date. Now, that alone is not enough. Those are just words. So what I need to do is I need to start actually clarify, what do those things mean within the idea of this task system I'm building, and not just what I intend for them to mean, which is part of it, but also how you receive them. So in terms of meaning, there's always that tension between the intended meaning, are we all on the same page of what we think this should mean, and how people receive it? How do people understand it? So I use the words goal and milestone. Do you immediately conjure this image on the right of a soccer or football goal and an old Roman milestone, or do you have other ideas? And is that metaphor going to muddle things up, or is it going to clarify things for you? So we've got to be careful there. We've got to make sure that we might have to test to make sure that what we say is what people receive. So another way of starting to work out meaning is to sort of table it out. So I've got a definitions table here, and these are partly definitions, but partly just stories I like to tell about terms to start to bring that language in and see if it makes sense to the people who are listening to me. So if we think about that concept of a goal, an important concept if you're designing tasks, I know it sounds very simple, but lots of people find this really hard to do. So I've said a goal is the why. Why are we even doing some work? And a goal I've written out as a significant outcome that requires tasks or milestones completed over time to achieve. So that definition alone still isn't enough because I've introduced new concepts I need to clarify as well, but it's a start. You may or may not agree with this. That's cool. In testing and in clarifying that, if I was designing for all of you, I could refine this and work it out over time. So I'm going to delve a little bit more into what a goal needs to be. So here I've defined it based on a sort of a dictionary definition, but you can also define something based on what it needs to contain or how it might need to behave. So here in the middle here, I've laid out what I call a blueprint. So it's got a definition there, but I've also started to think about what attributes, what needs to be in a goal. It might need to be assigned to someone. It might require a time frame. It might need, who it's been set by. There might be some relationships there, which I've started to try and also sketch out to illustrate to people that tasks contribute to goals, and goals essentially pull tasks along. And again, that's kind of an abstract concept. So I might need to clarify that later. Also, there might be types of goal, whether it's just for me, it's for my team, it's for my organization, or it's shared across teams or people. Now, this concept of goals pull tasks is a bit abstract. So another method to help people understand and come along the journey with me is to visualize it or use a metaphor. Metaphors can be really handy, used with caution. Sometimes they can be counterproductive. But here we have this idea of the kite surfer. I've got my goal, I got my task. I like this image because another principle I want to introduce later on is that tasks should always be attached to a goal. There shouldn't be any strings trailing in the water. All tasks should be attached to goals. In thinking about meaning and what things mean, I also might want to explore other people's models and language. Don't know if you guys have heard of this, but this is a popular project management software. Looking at the words they use, epic, story, board, issue. I'm going to be really upfront. Apologies to any Atlassian listeners. These terms, this language, these models have never really resonated with me, and often I've seen teams struggle to fit the way they work into the JIRA model. And so sometimes you've got to think about, do we want to try and fit how we work into this model? Do we want to come up with our own system and then see what software might support that? I think that's an important thing for teams to consider. So, I can't just go on about, like, in an abstract sense, what should a goal contain and those kind of things. I need to show you what I reckon one might look like. So here's an exemplar goal. It's not a real goal. I'm not a wood turner. I wish I was. So my goal here is be known as the best wood turner in New Zealand. And I've applied these little attributes of what I've called so I can. And I think these are useful to include because they help justify why you would pursue this goal. It's called by what it's going to allow me to do. So I want to be known as the best wood turner so I can apply premium prices to my products. If I'm the best in the business, I can get top dollar for my lathed goods. And some indicators. How am I going to know that I'm achieving this goal? So an indicator might be I'm appearing in some top wood turning searches online. And again, this starts to build the system because some of those indicators might hint at the work that might need to be done, like some SEO or website copywriting work. Classification. Now, Kat touched on this a little bit around the role of information architecture, simplifying things down, just cutting through some complexity. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why classification, just as a concept, is useful. If you look at this moment on the right, I've got a series or a list of headlines from the New York Times a couple of days ago. Scanning it, it's a little bit hard to sort of wrap your head around what's going on here and kind of like jump into what is most important or jump to what you would be interested in. And that's because I've taken away all the classifications that the New York Times would normally apply to it. Reading time, category, image, excerpt. Also, in terms of priority, like editors have chosen that this story is more important than this story, and so they go up the top based on what the populace wants to see. And you take all that stuff away, typography and spacing and layout notwithstanding, sorry, designers, those are also important, then it's kind of hard to process because it's just a big flat list. So classification helps turn unordered information into valuable subsets like the category I'm interested in or quick reads, things like that. And largely that's around working with attributes. What attributes do we need to apply to something so we can retrieve them based on that later? So coming back to tasks, I've got these important concepts of task and goal. What attributes might be useful to work with or plan or retrieve or use later on? So I've got this idea of priority that seems pretty important for goals and tasks, it's a shared one. And this idea of depth and breadth was a little bit abstract, but I think it's important for tasks that I think people don't think about this enough. And so going into that a little bit in a bit more detail, classifying tasks can help communicate the structure of that task. And by depth and breadth, I mean depth-wise, what focus is required to complete this task, something that people don't often think about. How difficult is this task? And breadth, like what's the time required and what number of steps might there need to be? And this is important to think about because when you structure your tasks, you might need to chop them up rather than trying to take on this big behemoth task that you're never going to move. So now we're going to move into sequence. So if we think about tasks and goals, we've got to think about what is the order in which things need to happen. How can we sequence information to make it more logical and useful? And I'm going to illustrate a to-do list on the right here that is going to fail. That daily to-do list is going to fail for a number of reasons. One, thinking back to before, it hasn't been classified very well. It's a mixture of personal and work things. That might be your preference, but it's kind of hard to tease out buy milk and walk dog from respond to emails and redesign website. But also there's no order of magnitude. So we can't plan those out because redesign website and invent new video game are gigantic and might take 6 months, whereas buy milk is a very tiny thing. So this is one of the problems with planning, is that we need to think about magnitude and size and priority. And in terms of sequencing things, particularly with tasks and systems, we need to think about the priority and the order in which things need to happen. So an important attribute for sequencing is priority. And another important concept to help us make these priority decisions is a principle. So this is basically a guiding rule that aids these decisions, as a thing that I say should always be true. So here's some examples of bringing the idea of principle into my task system. So, what are principles? Well, they help us guide decisions, how they're kind of pre-made. They provide rationale for sequence. Why would one thing be more important than the other? And they may be value-based or more functional-based. So example, the top of a value-based one, all tasks should service a goal. So if you think about that kite surfer, the goal is the kite, the tasks are attached to it. If a task is not attached to a goal, it shouldn't be there. It's just trailing in the water. And more functional tasks and milestones contribute to goals. So the idea is that once you've got a goal, this is starting to give us an idea of sequencing things. We need to sequence what tasks and milestones can help us achieve that goal. It may seem really obvious, but lots of people don't even think about this in this way. So thinking about my system, really the concept of milestones becomes really important. because basically we do these tasks to achieve a milestone, and a milestone being something concrete we can deliver, like a report that I give to you or a picture that I've illustrated and I can put in front of you. And these milestones contribute to goals, and tasks contribute to milestones. So what this sequencing is allowing us to do is to build up a planning method. So when we structure our task system within, spoiler alert, the fixed structure of the calendar, we can start to be very measured and careful about how these things should happen. So structurally, structure is within this task system I'm talking about is about, well, structure in general is about structuring information for optimal navigability around an environment. So we need to be able to align the shape of the tasks that we have coming in with the underlying structure that we need to match it to, which in a task system is time. It's the calendar. And I find the image of Tetris is often very telling here, because this is the task of Tetris. You bring things in and you've got a structure, you've got to line these things up. And now a lot of people succeed with the cataloging of the tasks in the first instance. Here are all the things I need to do. Here are what are related to. And they fail at allocating or apportioning time to actually achieve those things. So in the system, basically planning is about allocating time to complete tasks. So we've got a bit of a planning method here, which has been informed by our structural planning and our idea of sequence. So one, we need to decide on what the goals are, what the time period is, and we just need to plot the milestones. So that's the first thing we need to do. We've got a method. Two, we need to put those milestones into the calendar and then think about what tasks need to come up to that milestone to make it true. So here we start to get this bit of an idea, so that really from a planning perspective, we need to plot the milestones and then think about, for each of those milestones, what tasks need to lead to them. And that actually starts to simplify down the task of planning, whereas it was starting to feel a little bit complicated before. You may even take this to the day level. You may even zoom in from months or weeks to a day, block out time by hour, and basically design the hours of your day based on the shape of the task that needs to happen. So for example, that 9 to 11 block may be more of a deeper task, like drafting the chapter of a book, rather than admin that might be a shorter task that you can expect to just take you half an hour. And you may need to adjust it on the fly. Now, anything that you do with other people, which is most things, is going to require communication. You can't just have this beautiful idea of a task system. Oh, it's going to work this way. There's going to be goals, milestones, tasks. It's perfect. I've thought it all through. It's not going to work unless you communicate this out and get agreement that that's how it needs to happen. Now, it's not enough for you to go to your calendar and say, I've solved it. If I block out all my time, no one can ever interrupt me. Now, this is, partly done in jest, but I have seen people actually do this. You need to bring people along the journey. Systems need to work within other systems. And the system that you've advised for your team or for yourself, it's only going to succeed if other people can recognize its value. So if you can say, look, if I have flow time here, or if I had an afternoon free to focus on writing this chapter of the book, and you can deliver on that, you can show people the milestone over time, and they can see the value of giving you that time. And maybe that's a better argument for you being able to incorporate that into your business. And so you need to make these strategies, these ideas, these systems public, and you need to make them a little bit negotiable. And here's a really great example of how professors make time, a little bit negotiable. So professors have got a lot to do. They don't want to be interrupted all the time, but also they need students need some access to these experts. And so what often happens in universities and colleges is we have office hours where a professor is committing to be in a particular place for a fixed amount of time, go ask them a question. And I've seen people implement this at tech companies really well as well. So rather than being able to be pinged any day, any time, it's like, look, if you need me, raise the thing you need, and we'll do it in office hours. It's every fortnight on a Thursday for 3 hours, for example. It's a good system. So coming back to what we were trying to solve here, I have not given you a comprehensive end-to-end solve all your task problem system. That's to come. I've given you an idea of how you might start to solve that system for you using principles of information architecture. So what I think you need to do is to blueprint your own system using information architecture. So don't necessarily adopt the model of a particular software that comes your way. It's not necessarily going to solve your problems. Asana, Monday.com, Jira, Trello, whatever. Think about how you need to work, and then go to that piece of software and build it around the people who need to use it, and use the software to support. So maybe if you've got a really clear idea of how you want to work, you might go with something more free-form, like Airtable or Notion, or dare I even say it, a spreadsheet or a whiteboard or a wall. So just have whatever is going to work for you. And I want to end on this as well, which is that information architecture doesn't need to feel this way. And I think that what people need is something to hang it on, a process or a method to follow that makes it concrete. So hopefully I've made some of this, this idea of a task system and using information architecture concrete to you. Because what I believe is that information architecture is really about designing blueprints. So whether your system is a search system, a website, a physical space, an application, information architecture is largely about building the blueprints for those things. It's not about coding the website or finalizing the design or necessarily delivering it or writing all the content, but it's about the blueprints for all those things so that they gel and work well together as a system. And that's where I think information architecture excels. This system here, this idea of information architecture as these 6 considerations, is a work in progress. I would love your views, counter views, questions about this. And there's a whole lot more about this to come in future talks. But for now, thank you very much for listening to me for 20 minutes, and I hope to catch you around the conference. Cheers.